De dagene jeg har kjørt når det sånn skikkelig sommersol, da blir det ofte veldig vanskelig. Det superkomplisert å skyte på trikken når trikken beveger seg hele tiden, lyset beveger seg hele tiden, folka beveger seg hele tiden, folk kommer og går. Skjønner jo at jeg har liksom valgt.
Det ikke det letteste valgt.
Jeg har liksom valgt et prosjekt som kanskje det vanskeligste jeg kunne gjort.
Ja.
Jeg kan ikke planlegge noen ting. 2 minutter til Kjelsås, skal vi se. Rutrappen har svaret.
So I'm Øyvind. I've been taking photographs since I was about 13. My father was a photographer and he took me into the darkroom when I was about 5. It was mostly a hobby, but I did start to develop black and white prints in my parents' basement throughout my youth. And so it's got, like, photography has always been part of who I am, but I only started taking it more seriously about 4 or 5 years ago, coincidentally right before the pandemic, which kind of catapulted the whole thing, as I'm sure it's like that for many. My photography is somewhere in between maybe street photography and contemporary photography. I like the city, but I'm maybe not a typical street photographer in that sense. I'm more interested in sort of the social aspects and the way people interact. Yeah, and I'm also incredibly fascinated by Norwegianness, which is also a basis for a lot of the stuff that I do. Not to sound too pretentious, but I'm kind of still wondering what it is about the Norwegians, even though I am one myself. So I'm using photography as a way to kind of explore what Norwegian identity and cultural heritage is. And that's brought me to some of the projects that I'm working on.
Tror du hopper av her?
Skal hoppe her?
Ja.
Burde kanskje ha en fordel når jeg var med, for de så mer på meg enn de så på deg.
Det jo kjempefint. Jeg hadde en mistanke om at det kanskje kunne komme til å skje.
Ja.
Så der kommer en SL79 på vei tilbake også, vet du.
Tar vi det i den da?
But kind of, most of all, I think that one of the things that is very peculiar about Norwegians is that the fact that we're very private as individuals. We don't tend to socialize or engage with strangers as much as many other cultures do. For instance, like if you're on a bus in Norway, you will find people try to find sort of the one free line of sight where they won't meet the gaze of somebody else on the bus because they're afraid to have to start talking to somebody who they don't know. So we're kind of a people that tend to take our private space with us out into the public, which can show itself in quite interesting ways sometimes.
Det utfordringen at det blir veldig mye sånne dagligdags mundane, sånn totale. Det veldig fort gjort at det blir det. Det jo gørr kjedelig lenger, ikke sant?
So the SL79 tram car project is it's a self-imposed project that I decided to start in April of this year because I got news that the oldest of the Oslo tram cars were being replaced, being taken out of service. And it made me kind of react a little bit because, well, I'm a big fan of public transport in general, and maybe these tram cars in particular, because I just like the way they look. But when I got this news, something else occurred to me, and that is the fact that, once again, like the part of this Norwegian identity that makes us want to replace things all the time, is quite apparent in many aspects of Norwegian society. And there really isn't that much that looks old that gets kept around in Oslo. Still, there are some qualities to them, and there's also the fact that they've been part of how Oslo looks and sounds since 1979. For 45 years, they've been part of the cityscape here in Oslo. And I just figured that it would be worth doing something to give it like a kind of a swan song before we send them off into oblivion and replace them with ultra-modern looking things once again. There are some special qualities to that tram car in the way people move on them, the way they crowd up during rush hour. There's other things about them, like for instance, they have very straight and thin walls, so they move very close to the people outside. And the tram lines here in Oslo, they run pretty close to cafes and things like that. So sometimes you can be almost like you're sitting at the table of somebody who's at a sidewalk restaurant, for instance. You're almost like part of the table when you're on the tram. And there's a few other things as well. I mean, they have large back windows, panoramic back windows. And that's also one of the reasons they have to replace them, because there's no driving position at both ends of these trams. So they basically need to turn around 360 to go back where they came from when they reach the end destination. And now obviously that requires that you have some kind of a loop of tracks at the end of it. So that's like a disadvantage. But it does make for a pretty cool back window though. It gives you a pretty good view of the city.
Har du lyst til å se på meg, Øyvind? Prosjektet handler om den typen her som blir borte om en måned eller to.
Well, so far I think I've crossed about 100 hours riding the tram since April. I've been shooting for 25 days in total. To start with, I just decided I would just hop on the tram and see what happens. I did Google Street View all of the tram lines that were places where this tram might go, and tried to sort of map out where would be good places to shoot. But then I kind of abandoned that thing because at the end I didn't want to take pictures of the tram. It's not about documenting the tram itself. So I might as well just ride the tram. So obviously I've taken some shots that are, establishing shots, showing the tram as part of the cityscape, that kind of thing, the hero shots, if you will. But after having done that, I was thinking, it's all about it's all about the street photography perspective, like what happens on board the tram. How do people move on the tram? How does it crowd up during rush hour? How does the tram look on the inside? How does the city look from inside the tram? Those kinds of things. And you can do that basically anywhere along where the tram rides. So I've been doing a lot of that, just being on the tram, and also talking to people whenever there's somebody who looks interesting or has a cool pose, or there's something about them that tells you that they're about to go somewhere special, for instance. I've always made a habit of stopping to talk to them, ask for their portraits, and so that's also part of it. Documenting both people and situations occurring on board this old tram car, more or less using the tram car as like a studio, as a backdrop. I think the most important thing if you're doing this kind of work is that you just need to accept the fact that you're gonna have to grind a lot. You're gonna have to be persistent. You're gonna have to accept the fact that you're going to experience a lot of self-doubt. You have to work through that. And also, you gotta be aware that you're gonna have days where nothing feels right. I guess any basic street photographer can relate to that. You know, you go out sometimes, you're just not feeling it. I've had days where I come home and I have 25 images, and that's all I have. And out of those, I might have nothing. But sometimes I come up with 25 images that I believe to be trash, and then actually 4 of them are actually pretty good. And you never really know. It's, at least for me, I don't know how other people work, but for me it's always hard to know exactly how things are going to be tied together after the fact. Which means that I need to see the images in the context of each other before I see what's actually worth something. So being a yes person and just trying things, not being too critical in the moment and then being critical after the fact is maybe one of the pieces of advice I could probably give. Preparation is obviously always key to the extent that you can actually do it. Not be afraid to make contacts. Just, you know, make a habit of excusing yourself for a weird request, but then explain, and people will generally humor you with their insight if you're polite in that sense. Coincidentally, that's something that I've always been pretty good at, so I'm not really afraid of making contact with people I don't know and just asking for favors. And doing that in a nice way will get you quite far. But sometimes you do need to be a little bit on the inside. You do need to know a little bit more than anybody else to be able to produce a body of work that's interesting for other people. And for that you need some insight, and the only way to get that is to reach out to people. I'm taking pictures of stuff that happens on a tram. It doesn't seem that remarkable to people in general, so that's like the first thing that I've tried to explain to people is like, what's the real value of this body of work? Which has led me to have to sort of reiterate it and reinforce that for myself as well during the process, which has gradually led me to really wholeheartedly believe in this project. So at this point, I'm in no doubt that I have to do this and I have to complete it. So I'm kind of over the self-doubt stage at this point. But it has taken me quite a bit of time to get to that. And I can only imagine what it feels like for somebody who's working on a project for 8 years, because this had, you know, 8 months on the clock. And I had to go through the whole process during that time, which was kind of interesting. So it's like a crash course in project photography, I guess.